it is called How to Do Cool Stuff in Tableau 2023. We did How to Do Cool Stuff in Tableau in 2022, and seemed like it was a hit. So we decided to go for it again. Brand new content. Yeah, forward-looking statement. That's from the Tableau conference. I don't know if we need that, but we'll do it anyways. Just some quick introductions, and let me move the little screen share thing out of the way. My name is Kevin. I'm here on the left. My identical twin brother, Ken, is on the right. Together, we run the website flerlagetwins.com. If you're a Tableau user group, hopefully you've heard of it or seen it and run across it at some point in time. And if you haven't, hopefully you will in the future. I'm hearing some background noise. I don't know if that's, if we can mute everybody. There we go. Okay, sorry, I didn't know if somebody couldn't hear me or something. I'm a 4-time Tableau visionary. For those folks that don't know what that is, it's something that Tableau selects every year. And it's for somebody who's a master, a teacher, and a collaborator. Ken is a Hall of Fame Tableau visionary. There are only 16 in the entire world. In the world, there's only 16. So big congratulations to Ken for that. And as we mentioned, we did our Tableau conference presentation. We're doing our Tableau conference presentation. This is a picture from our second session at the conference. It was an incredible, that picture makes it look like there's like 10,000 people there. There wasn't that many, but it was a packed house and we had a lot of fun. So thank you. If you were there, thank you for coming and appreciate it. We're super excited. We recently, about 2 months ago, joined Moxie Analytics. Moxie Analytics is run by 2 amazing women. I'm still hearing a ton of background noise. If people are able to mute. It's run by 2 amazing women, Laura Madsen and Serena Roberts. Laura's an author of 3 books, including Disrupting Data Governance. And Serena's a 5-time Tableau ambassador. You were talking about ambassadors. She's a Tableau user group ambassador. We always start our Tableau conference and most presentations off with something silly. At Tableau Conference 22, we showed this. This is the ultimate favorites competition. Ken and I have been blessed that people like our work on Tableau Public. And at one point, at least at Tableau Conference 2022, I was the 2nd most favorited author on Tableau Public, and Ken was a distant 3rd. Pradeep Kumar has passed us since then, but so anyways, we like to have a little fun. And so we're going to tell a little story. It'll be fairly brief. The story is about me, Ken, and our Chief Operating Officer, Serena, at Tableau Conference 22. This is before we started working with Serena. We were at a Tableau event and we were having some beers and having fun. And at the end of the event, we could see Mandalay Bay. So we decided, hey, let's just walk. But unfortunately, what looks like 3 blocks in Vegas is really about 3 miles. So we spent about 2 hours walking and talking. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, of course, in super slow motion, Serena takes a step and starts to fall. In fact, she didn't just start to fall, she completely wiped out. She was laying on her back. So you're probably wondering, what could she have slipped on, or how did she slip? Well, she did slip on something, and we'll play a little game. You can throw your answer in the chat if you don't mind. But was it the stereotypical banana peel? Was it a tennis ball, stick of butter, or a ham sandwich? Give you a second to answer, and then I'll give you the answer. Might be one of these like Sesame Street, which one of these don't belong, because that ham sandwich looks a little bit different than everything else. It was, in fact, a very, very greasy ham sandwich. So she had literally just completely wipes out. And this story is 100% true, up until this point, at least. So as Serena's lying upon the rubble of thinly sliced ham, light lettuce, and extra mayo, she has a vision. And that vision looks like this: Moxie Analytics plus Flerlage Twins equals world domination, or just a pretty sweet idea. So that's how Ken and I joined Moxie Analytics, a great team, small but mighty, where our primary goal is to enable people to solve problems with data. And our almost primary goal, but secondary goal, is, of course, world domination. Ken and I do work focused on data visualization, but really focused on Tableau. We do lots of data project work. We have a program called Fractional Data Hero where you can get us for 4 or 5 hours a week or 20 hours a month, and where we can just kind of help you throughout the process. And we also have a Tableau Lifeline product where essentially you can just get us for an hour and we can help you out with a sticky problem. All right, so let's get straight into the presentation. We're going to do how to do cool stuff in Tableau. This is going to be a mixture of tips, tricks, different techniques. No reason for you to take notes or anything like that. I assume we're recording today. It's also available on demand on Salesforce Plus. And then all the content that we have is available. All the different blog posts is available on that URL, which you can just hit that QR code and get to very easily. We want to say thanks to an awesome community. I saw you mention Jared earlier, but a lot of these tips, most of these tips, all these tips are inspired by, a lot of them are ours and some of them are theirs, but many are just inspired by just an awesome community of people. So thank you to all these folks and everybody else that's involved in the community and sharing knowledge. All right, we are going to get right to it. I'm going to jump into Tableau and we're going to start off with some cool stuff with design. So what I'm going to go through is some of its aesthetics, just making a chart look really nice. Some of it is to help the readability, the understandability of the chart, to make it more effective in its messaging. So we're going to just start out with a scatter plot. So I've got the scatter plot here, and as we look at this, we might be able to see some overlapping marks. We can kind of see this orange on top of this red. Might be kind of hard for you to see over Zoom, but what we can't see is this other mark that's on top of the blue. So we have this blue mark on top of the blue, and because I have this set at 100% opacity, you can't see that mark. So anytime we're building a chart like a scatter plot or a jitter plot or a dot plot, anywhere where there could be overlapping marks, we want to make sure that we set that opacity down a notch, right? So this allows us to see those overlapping marks, but still not super clear. So one of my favorite techniques with a scatter plot is to make it a dual axis scatter plot. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to press and hold the control key, and I'm going to duplicate this pill out to the right. I'm going to go to that second axis, this one over here. I'm going to change it from a circle to a shape, and it selects this sort of outline circle. That's perfect. I'm going to bring the color up all the way, and then we'll dual axis this and synchronize these axes. And I'll show the end result versus the original. The end result is a beautiful scatter plot, in my opinion, but also implements the transparency and this sort of outline. It makes this chart really easy to read and understand. So cool little technique with scatter plots. Here I'm showing sum of sales by category and subcategory, and this is all well and fine, nothing wrong with it. Maybe it needs some labels or an axis, but one of the things that kind of bothers me about it is I've got furniture, and that just sort of runs straight into office supplies, and that just runs straight into technology, and there's no real sort of separation of the different categories. So we could, theoretically take category and drag that onto color, and that kind of gives us the separation, but it does introduce color that's probably not necessary. So let's pull that off, and we'll show another little trick. It's been around for a long time, but I love this trick, use it all the time. If we go to analysis, totals, and add subtotals, it's going to add this total bar here for each category, this subtotal bar for each of the categories. So what we can do is we can right click on that and choose format, come over this label of total, and we'll just delete that thing so it's gone. And then if folks can mute themselves, is there a way that we can just mute all participants? Oh, sorry, I'm clicking all over the place. Yeah, if we could mute all participants, that'd be great. But so we got the subtotal bar, and what I can do is then click on this, and we have this drop down, and I can just choose to hide it. Now we have this separation. I'll show you kind of the before and after. Here's where they're all running together. Here, using subtotals, we're able to create this separation between the different categories. Love this technique. Use it all the time. Makes this bar chart just so much easier to read. I grew up just south of Cincinnati. I'm in Kentucky, but I grew up just south of Cincinnati. Been a lifelong Bengals fan. Ken grew up here as well, even though he moved to Pennsylvania. And our Bengals stunk for many, many years. But recently they've been good. They went to Super Bowl 2 years ago, right? So this is looking at AFC teams and looking at their winning percentage in the past year. So this chart, and we're highlighting the Cincinnati Bengals. This chart does a really good job of comparing different teams' winning percentages, right? But what it doesn't do a good job of is showing what the winning percentage could be, right? Obviously, it could be a total of 100%, and that'd be nice to be able to show that. So I'm going to just show the end result before we actually do it. So here we have the chart that's just doing a good job of comparing against each other. And then this one compares against each other as well as against that 100%. I just have this little thin line back behind it that shows the total possible. And this is really a technique that Georgia Loopy's been using for a long time. So we want to create this and add that additional context. So let's do that. Instead of duplicating the pill like I did before, I'm just going to create an inline calculation. I'm going to type nin of 1.0. That's just going to create a bar for all these of the length of 1. We'll pull off this color. We don't need that. Let's change the color to kind of a light gray. I'll change the size to be really small. Then we'll dual axis this thing and of course synchronize. And we'll kill these headers for now. And now what we see is this bar, this thin bar is on top of the big bar. So let's just change the position by dragging that out. That looks pretty good, but there's just one thing that's driving me crazy. Maybe it's my OCD, I don't know. But this bar just isn't thin enough to me. The problem is I've got it as thin as it can go. So I'll show you a little trick that I use. I go to color, and then I'll add a border to that bar, a border that's the same color as the background, white. And now that little bar is much thinner, and we get this great looking chart. Again, this compares the values against the team of the other teams really, really well. This does that as well, but also compares against the potential winning percentage. The other thing it does is create these really nice margins on our chart, this nice right aligned sort of margin that just looks great in a dashboard. I don't love stacked bar charts. Well, first off, I should note I'm using that little subtotals trick here, by the way, but I don't love stacked bar charts because, well, if we look at this, we can tell the total really well. We can compare the total furnishings against total chairs really easily, but it gets difficult to compare these segments in gray because they're not at a shared axis, right? We can compare the red, we compare the total. With the gray ones, they're kind of offset, right? So stack bar charts, sometimes I don't love, but in this case, this is looking at the count of orders, and then the red ones are the returned orders, right? So if we hover over this, we see 67 returned and 852 that weren't returned. And we can do that throughout, 108 returned and 1231 that weren't returned. I don't love that I have to like hover over the red and then the gray to get each piece of information. And in fact, if we come down to chairs, we can see there's this little tiny sliver, right? This little tiny sliver of red, and it's hard to even, I'm trying to get my cursor there. I got my cursor on it. And so when it's that hard for me to put my cursor on it, of course, it's gonna be that hard for our users. So what I really wanna do is change this to where I don't have to hover over the red. I can hover over any part of the bar, and it gives me both the returned values and the values that weren't returned. This is really actually quite simple to do. So I'm going to duplicate this sheet. I'm just going to name it something crazy so it comes to the top of my list. And we're going to make just a couple changes. We're going to take this, and I'm going to hit that control key again so that we can copy or duplicate that pill. I'm going to put this wasn't returned out on our rows. Then I'm just going to unhide or unshow the headers for category and subcategory. Do just a touch of cleanup, maybe add a label here. Then I'm gonna come back to this main chart we started with, and I'm just gonna add it as a vision tooltip. So let's add insert, and then we're gonna add that weird named sheet. This is set to filter on all fields, which means if I hover over the red, it's going to filter down to all fields, including was it returned, and it would just give me the bar for the red. I don't want that. I want the bar for the red and the bar for the gray. So I want to filter this at the subcategory level. So I'm going to change this all fields filter to, excuse me, to just subcategory. So this tooltip is only going to filter at the subcategory. I'm just going to show you the final result. This is the original one where it's almost impossible to get my cursor on that 5. And this is the updated one where I show 70 total orders, 65 were not returned and 5 were returned. So now wherever we hover over the bar, we get that additional information. All right, this bar chart is looking at sum of energy usage by region. The bar's fine. I mean, it is red. It's kind of up in my face. And I guess when we start thinking about this, you know, we always hear data visualization experts talk about the data ink ratio, right? How much data compared to ink do you have? There's a lot of ink. This is kind of up in my face. So there's one little technique that I love. William Brown calls it a punctuated bar chart. This is going to evolve what we did before, is another dual axis. So I'm just going to hit the control key and drag that out. Let's change this secondary axis to a Gantt bar. And I'm going to change the label and just make it bold. Then I'll pull the label off the first one. I'm going to go ahead and dual axis this and synchronize. I'm not going to worry about the axes anymore. And then on the bar, I'm just going to knock the opacity way down. So now we have this really beautiful bar chart. Maybe it's not anything more than aesthetics, but this really beautiful bar chart that kind of gets a less, I don't know, angry in your face kind of look. So love this technique. Ken uses it constantly. If you've ever seen Ken and I present in the past, probably 3 years, you've heard us talk about transparent shapes. We have in that link that we shared earlier, there's some blog posts on transparent shapes. A transparent shape, if you imagine me opening PowerPoint and drawing a square, then I can go up to the color and I can remove the fill color. And then I can go up to the border and I can remove the border color. And when you do that, that shape disappears. But in reality, it's still there. It's just completely transparent. You can save that as an image, and then you can bring it into your shapes repository in Tableau. And you wouldn't believe how many use cases there are for this transparent shape. One of them, probably my favorite, is when we've got big numbers. We've got things using the text mark. And these are just some bands at the top of my dashboard. And then I have a user interacting with it and they click on it and they get the big blue screen of death, right? What happened here? My user thinks they broke Tableau and they're sending me messages like, oh my God, I did something. How do we fix it? It's just a very unnatural thing that doesn't go with your dashboard. And you can't change this background color. So there's a really easy way to fix that. We can change this from text to a shape, and then we can change that shape to a transparent shape just to get rid of the thing altogether. And now when your user interacts with it, they don't get that big blue screen. It's just a much better user experience and they don't think they broke Tableau. We can do something similar with, well, let me explain this first. This is a dashboard that I created just to look at what people were using, what sizes, the kind of default size people were using for their dashboards. And this is very informal, got 50 responses, and then I just created a dashboard on it. So the leading one was 1600 by 900, right? There was out of 50, there was 8 people that were, as a standard, used 1600 by 900. And then we can kind of walk through this and see the different layouts, and it does a highlight action on size, and you see over at the right, it's highlighting that bar. If you're anything like me, you're looking at that highlight action, you're going, why do I have that big yellow square? It doesn't look anything like my dashboard. And it kind of looks like this just big sticky note. I'd like to get rid of that. So we're going to try to do that. So let's go to this sheet and you'll see we have size on rows. Size is the field that we're highlighting on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to size. And what I've done is just duplicate that size pill. It's right here, size copy. And I'm going to drag that up to my rows. We got the same exact thing here, but I'm going to just hide the original size. Remember, it's highlighting on size, and now I'm showing size copy. So now when I come back and do the highlight action, it highlights the bar, but it doesn't do that weirdo sticky note looking thing. So love this technique, use it all the time. Sure, you have to duplicate a pill, but much better user experience. All right, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pass over to Ken. He's going to do a couple sections, then we'll come back to me later.
All right. Good with my screen?
Kevin? We can see it. Yep, we can see it.
All right, so I'm going to do some cool stuff with maps. Just to start this out, what happens, the world is a globe, right? And anytime we try to flatten that to a two-dimensional map, we're going to end up with some level of distortion. And that's exactly what this true size thing here is showing. It's showing us this true size of Greenland versus the rest of the world. It's significantly smaller than it actually is. And the reason for that, or that it's significantly smaller than it looks like on the map. And the reason for that is that we're using a Mercator projection. So it's a standard map in Tableau is a Mercator projection. It's a standard in a lot of different platforms. This was created 500 years ago to help sailors, allow them to sort of sail in more or less of a straight direction. The problem is that if we look at these different vertical sections, these are all about 1,000 miles apart or in length, right? So you can see as we get near the North Pole, and the same thing as we get near the South Pole, there's this sort of stretching of this, and this causes significant distortion, makes places like Greenland seem really, really big on the map when they're not really that big at all. And so there are a number of things we could do in Tableau to kind of at least be aware of this or to adjust for it and sort of account for it as we're building maps. So one of those things, and I didn't know this existed until Kevin showed it to me just recently, we probably all use the scale option. So if I turn on the map scale, it shows this 3,000 mile map scale. Well, did you know that if you hover over this, it shows you sort of a map scale accuracy? So right now it's showing plus or minus 20,000 miles. It's not a whole lot of value, but let's zoom in on these countries and take a closer look. So I forgot to mention that I'm highlighting Greenland and Democratic Republic of Congo here because they are more or less the same size, same area, about the same size country, even though Greenland looks way bigger on this Mercator projection. So let's zoom in on the DRC. We hover over this and we see our map scale accuracy is plus or minus 100. Not too bad from an error standpoint. Let's just zoom in on both of these, and we'll get to the point where we're looking at Greenland and DRC as with 1,000 mile scale. But if we hover over and see that map scale accuracy, look at the big difference. That Greenland one is showing plus or minus 800 miles. So this is a really cool tool just for as you're looking at a map, and if you understand the accuracy of the scale, that you can click on that, you can hover over that and get a good feel for it, and know when you're starting to make decisions or based on that scale, and make sure that you understand what you're dealing with, right? Of course, if your goal is to show these things with an accurate scale, then maybe we use a different map projection altogether. So hammer projection is an equal area projection. You can see the Greenland is much smaller on here, closer to the size of DRC, which is around here. And we can actually put these into Tableau as well. So I'm going to build this hammer map. I will click new data source, and then, hit statistical file, spatial file. And let's go find our data for this. I've downloaded this hammer projection in a GeoJSON file format. There are a number of different websites that allow you to download these different spatial files. We'll click open. And then we'll jump over here. I'm going to drag my geometry field out to detail. And now we have a hammer projection. Now you see here, it's mapping this spatial file on top of that background Mercator map. We want to just basically turn off that background stuff. So we'll go to the background layer and uncheck all these boxes, or we can just throw this washout up to 100%. And now that stuff is gone. If we highlight those two countries, Greenland and Democratic Republic of Congo, you can see pretty quickly that they are more or less the same size. But this is imperfect as well, right? This map projection, even though it's got equal area, it distorts, particularly as you're getting closer to the poles, it distorts the shape of these countries. So Greenland isn't really this shape, But that's just the level of just the distortion you're going to get with this type of map. And I think that's an important thing to note, is that, any type of map is going to have some level of distortion. But I think it's important to think about what your goal is, what you're trying to share with your audience, and then pick a map projection that best meets that goal. Knowing that there's always some level of distortion, you can pick the thing that most closely meets the goal that you're trying to achieve. So we can do other cool things with spatial files as well. So how many people have dealt with this? I call this the Alaska problem. This is a map showing poverty rates by county, and we're showing for the whole US, and because Alaska is way up there in the Northeast, or the Northwest, and Hawaii is way down there in the Southwest, we end up with a whole bunch of extra sort of white space and not much, we're not really leveraging the ink on this page, if you will, right? So what is the solution we typically apply for this? Well, we create one sheet that zooms into just the continental US. We just got to filtering out Hawaii and Alaska. We create another one for Alaska, create another one for Hawaii, then we put them on a dashboard, we float Alaska and we float Hawaii, right? So this works, but I think it's got a couple of big problems. One is this floating thing. If you try to put these in too tight, you're going to end up sort of overlapping. You can't click on the Southern California counties. The other bigger problem is that as soon as we filter these different sheets, it changes the min and max value of our color palette, right? So this dark purple on Alaska is about 24%. If I look at it on the continental US, it's about 50, it's about twice that, right? So these color scales don't match, and we then have to start applying these other hacks to make that work. So I just don't love this technique. I'd rather use something that allows us to more easily get this map. Luckily, Sarah Battersby, who's a former Tableau employee and a cartographer, she used a GIS tool to basically build a spatial file. She started with a Lambert map projection, and she brought Alaska down and Hawaii over. And now we have this single spatial file that we can use to build this map. So let's do that. I'm going to first show you, sorry, I'm in the wrong, I built this in the wrong place. So let me clear this. Get all of this off here. I have already built this data source here, this Lambert map. And you see we have two connections. We have an Excel file that has our poverty rate by county. We have a spatial file, and that's that spatial file that Sarah Battersby created. And we're just joining these together. We're using FIPS codes. If you're not familiar with FIPS codes, are just integer values that identify states, counties, and I think probably a few other things in the US. So we're just joining based on those. And then we come over to our Lambert file, we drag geometry onto the view and start to see what we've got already. This is just a single mark. So let's drag county and state over to detail, and that breaks this out into individual marks. We'll put poverty rate on color. Let's edit these colors. I'm going to turn off the border, and I'm going to use this Inferno color palette. And with just a handful of steps, we have this really nice map, one single sheet. It solves all the tricky problems that we have with the Alaska problem, and does so in a really beautiful and engaging map. All right, so let's keep talking about spatial files, because I think there's so much power in what we can do with it. I love hex maps. Hex maps are a great way to sort of reduce the impact of the size of actual geography. So here we're showing profit ratio by county. And typically in the past, you would do hex maps by getting a data set that has sort of the X and Y coordinates of each of these things. And then you plot it using a scatter plot, and then use a hexagon shape. And it's kind of a painful process. Anymore, I just use a spatial file for this. So this is something that a number of people in the community came together and kind of built these spatial files. This particular one is built by Luke Stanky. Let me just show you this data source real quick. Like the last one, we've got two connections. We've got our Superstore data, and we have our spatial file, and we join those together on state here to put them together. And we've been able to create this really simple hex map with just a couple of clicks, just like that last example that I showed. But one problem I have with hex maps in general is as soon as you start to filter on things, then it stops looking like the US, right? Because there's no background map, you can't actually see the positions of those states. It just seems like this big blob of hexagons, right? And if you saw our presentation at last Tableau conference, you'll know that we showed how to solve this problem using sets and set control. But there's a much easier solution to this, and that is using map layers. So let me turn on all the regions here. And what I've done is created an entirely different data source here that I've called maps hex alone. Let's just take a quick look at that. It's just that spatial file. We're not connecting it to Superstore at all. And if we come back to this and we drag out geometry and then drop it on this new marks layer, it's going to create a brand new maps layer here. Let's change our opacity down to 0. We're going to drag state abbreviation onto label. And now as I start to filter some things out, we'll get that background map that stays there. You still get the shape of the US, and it doesn't just look like a big blob of weird hexagons. In the end, I think this is a much better approach, much better solution than these big gaps. We can still tell that there are some states there that just happen to not have any profits for our given set of filters. Okay, so let's completely switch gears to something else, and we're going to talk about some cool stuff with synchronized scrolling. So you're probably wondering what in the world I mean by synchronized scrolling. So let's just kind of go through it. Ultimately, what we want to do is build this dashboard. So this dashboard shows by state and province 3 different metrics. It's showing sales, profits, and profit ratio. And for each of those metrics, we're showing the total of those. We're showing a spark line showing that measure by month. And then on that spark line, we're showing the min and max values, right? So those are the key things we need to do. And we need to have them sectioned off kind of like this. So if you've used Tableau for a while, you're looking at this and you already know that this is a difficult thing to do. But we're going to kind of try to work through it and see how we can solve this problem, see if we can come up with a good solution to make this work. So I would start off by trying to do this with a single sheet. So I've dragged month up to columns, I've dragged measure values to rows, and then I've dragged those 3 measures over to my measure values pane. And you can see I've been able to get these spark lines. But one problem is that they're on this shared axis, and this axis runs from 0 to about 20,000. And profit ratio is really just a percentage, right? So that number is so small that it just ends up looking like a flat line of zeros, right? So we need a way to make these kind of have their own independent axis. And one way we can do that is by using a calculated field to normalize these values. So if we open up this ratio to 0 to 1 calculated field, basically what we want to do is take the minimum value, make it 0, take the maximum value, make it 1. And this formula will allow us to do this. It's got some weird stuff with LODs and that kind of thing. But ultimately, once we apply this, they're all on this axis from 0 to 1. And we sort of eliminate that problem with the flat profit ratios, right? So that's part of this working. The next part we want to deal with is the totals, right? So I've been able to get the total sales by putting a discrete pill up on rows, but now when I try to, how do I get the profit and the profit ratio in here? Essentially what I need to do is insert a discrete pill in between these measures, and you know that that's not really possible, right? So I'm kind of stuck at this point. And I'm probably starting to look for some sort of hack for how I can make this work, right? So one of those potential hacks is the cell size hack. This is something from Sam Parsons. Basically allows us to plot a measure and have different sizes for each of those measure values. So really, really cool technique, but it's complicated. You can see all these pills up here and this table calculation, and there's some funny settings that we got to play with. And quite frankly, I couldn't figure out how to make this work for the chart I was trying to build. And so this is just not for the faint of heart, and probably not a great solution to dealing with this problem, at least not for most people. I'm going to try an entirely different technique. I'm ready to just give up on this one. We're going to try an entirely different technique to see if we can do this with a single sheet. And for that, we're going to use map layers. So when the map layers functionality came out in Tableau, a bunch of enterprising community members realized that, if we could sort of figure out the X and Y coordinates of something like a line chart or any kind of chart, then we could plot those, sort of manually plot those positions, and then transform that data into geospatial data. And by transforming it into geospatial data, we can take advantage of all the limitless map layers that we can create. So that's what I ended up doing here, right? So this is using basically 9 map layers. We have a layer for each of the totals, we have a layer for each of the spark lines, and we have a layer for the min and max values. And just to give you a picture of what these look like, here is the calculated field for this sales line. Again, as I said, I'm basically figuring out the X and Y coordinates and then transforming those into latitude and longitude, geospatial fields using make point, and then I'm plotting them in these separate map layers. So that is really cool. It's really powerful. You can do a million different things. Honestly, anything in the world you can imagine you can do with this. And I've seen some really cool visualizations that people have done using this technique. That said, this took me hours to do, and it was really hard and required a really in-depth knowledge of Tableau. And so I generally wouldn't recommend this approach for this dashboard either. So at this point, I feel like I've exhausted all of my single sheet options, and I'm about ready to give up and see if we can do this using multiple sheets. So what I'm going to do is create a single sheet for sales. Since we're just using one measure here, a single measure of sales, we're able to create a single sheet, and then we'll do the same thing for profit. I'm going to bring these together on a single dashboard, so I don't want to show state multiple times, so we're going to hide that header, and then we do the same thing for ratio, and then bring all 3 of those together on a dashboard like this. So this looks okay until we realize that we have to scroll these things, right? So I start to scroll the total ratio, and it doesn't scroll with the rest of these, and now everything's out of whack. I can't really see any states below Maryland on this dashboard. So that's where we introduce this whole idea of synchronized scrolling. If I can come up with a method such that when I scroll one of these, I can scroll all 3 of them, that will sort of solve this problem. So fortunately, our community is amazing, as we mentioned before, and they've come up with a few techniques for this. One that I like quite a bit is this paging technique. You can see here we've got a previous and a next button. Watch these numbers and these states as we click next. It's just going to sort of jump to the next page, right? 14 at a time in this case, moving forward or moving back, right? And the way this works is first of all, we start off by using an index calculated field to get this numbering. And then we have a parameter for the page number. You can see here is that page number goes up and down. It's basically just jumping forward a page. And then the page size defines how many states, provinces can be on a single page at a time. And in the end, we put together this calculated field page filter that looks at all 3 of these and figures out which of these ones do we want to filter down to. So as we're increasing these pages, it's essentially just filtering it down to the right set of 14 states and provinces. All right, and these previous and next buttons are just firing parameter actions to push that forward, push that page forward or backward. So it's a super cool technique. I think we're all used to working with this sort of user experience from the web, and it works pretty well. But there are some problems with it, and I'll get back to that here in a moment. Now, there's an alternate version of this as well that uses this sort of fake scroll bar idea. So this looks like a scroll bar here. In fact, it acts like a scroll bar as I'm clicking down. It's moving up, moving to a lower list, and I go down, it's going down further down the list. So it works just like a scroll bar, but this is actually a sheet using a Gantt mark and some index calculated fields and that kind of thing as well. And instead of paging whole pages at a time, it's just sort of pages down and up in small portions. This uses the same basic technique with parameters and parameters actions that are causing this to move forward and backward. And I like these techniques, but there's one pretty major problem, and that's this index calculated field. This is really hard. Believe it or not, it's really hard to get it to compute correctly, particularly when you have missing values in a month. So to get this to work well and consistently, I ended up having to make sure I had at least a single value for every month for every state, and that's not always easy to do. And if you can't do that, it makes these index calculated fields really hard. Plus, there's still an awful lot of setup and some complex things with parameter actions and calculated fields to get this to work. And after having done all this, I'm just kind of like, this seems like such a simple dashboard, and it should be so much easier to create. So what if, having done all this, what if I could tell you that we could create this in 30 seconds? And then hopefully everyone's over there like cheering, yeah, we want to see it. All right, so I'm going to show you how to do this in 30 seconds. So we start with this dashboard that has our 3 sheets on there. And the trick here is going to be to increase the height of this dashboard until those scroll bars disappear. So we're just going to keep increasing this, and eventually 20, yeah, there we go. Our scroll bars disappear. Now we're going to create a story. I don't use stories very often. In fact, I never use stories, but I think this is a pretty cool use for stories. So we'll create a new story here, and we're going to drag that dashboard into it. We don't want this caption, so I'm going to right-click this, edit the height. Let's just change it to 1. 1 is the minimum value. And boom, just like that, we have a scrollable dashboard with these 3 sheets, and all in about 30 seconds, and a much simpler solution than all those other things that we were doing a minute ago. All right, I'm going to hand back to Kevin. He's going to finish us up.
I love all the build up to that one. That one at the Tableau conference was sort of this, it was definitely like the mic drop moment. We heard people talking about it later in the week, and it was very cool. So well done, Ken. My stuff isn't going to be nearly as cool as his, but I'll finish this off here. All right, everybody see Tableau okay? I'll assume.
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect. I'm just going to be doing some cool random tips. This is kind of like a speed tipping that you might see Lorna and Ann do at the conference, or Heidi. So here I've got a sum of sales by month and broken out by category. And then I have this filter, or this field called month, and I've added that month to the filter. And I can filter on that, right? So we can see here that this filter is sorted in ascending order, January 2020 to December 2023, looking into the future, because that's what Superstore's data does. But there's this common question I get constantly is, how do I change the sort order of this filter, right? So what people always do is they go to edit, or maybe I can edit the filter here, and then I can start fiddling with this, and it's really hard to find any place that I can change the sort order. So let me hide that, and I'll show you that we can do this just at the field level. We can do it at the default properties. So if I right click on that field, go to default properties, and go to sort, you'll see it's set to ascending. If I change it to descending, simple enough, it's now in descending order, right? I am gonna change this back and put it back to ascending. The other thing we can do is I use parameters. I use parameters for months all the time. So maybe I want my data to refresh to the most recent month. So I use a dynamic parameter, and I always want to select the most recent month. And I want the most recent months at the top, not at the bottom. I might have 10 years worth of months, and I don't have to go all the way to the bottom to pick the most recent. So if we click on this and go to create, we can create a parameter, and that'll automatically populate the parameter if you didn't know that happened. And in this case, you'll see it's starting at 2020, going down to 2023. This is in ascending order. This parameter is set exactly like the default sort order of the field. So if I go to date, or if I go to default properties and click sort, change it to descending, and then create the parameter, we'll now have a parameter with the most recent values at the top. So question I see all the time, and great little tip to fix that. How many times have you had this sort of really large workbook? It's got tons of sheets. All the sheet names are long. And so you get to this point where I really need to move this sheet and put it with some other similar sheets. So I start just like dragging this thing. I drag it and then I click, 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 click. And I drag it again and I click, 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 click. Well, the truth is down here at the little bottom right corner, there's this little grid. If you click on this, you get this sort of PowerPoint view. Then you can just move and drop this thing wherever you want. And you don't have to do that move, click, click, click thing. And then when you're ready, just double click on the sheet you want to go to, and you can start working in Tableau again. So I've done that like probably 200 times and just recently started doing it I'll call it the PowerPoint way. All right, this dashboard is looking at my son's high school bowling team. So he's a pretty good bowler, and they use this. The coaches are using this dashboard to kind of review metrics and decide on lineups and stuff like that. And I didn't get paid for it. I just did it for free, and they found it really useful. Here down the bottom, I've got this filter here, and it's just discrete, and I can filter by months. And I'm interacting with it, and then I accidentally click on this November. And I get this weird gray or light blue highlighting here, but it's not really telling me anything because I've got all the months selected. And so I'm trying to get rid of it, and I can't seem to, and then I'm starting to get really frustrated. Why can't I get rid of this little gray highlight? I'll show you the easiest trick in the world. You press and hold the control key, and then you click again, and then that thing disappears. So I'll show it one more time. I accidentally get to select it, and you can't get rid of it. Press and hold the control key if you're using Windows, and click it again, and it disappears. So that thing drove me nuts for years. All right, I have this data source. This is on movies, and this is comedic actors. This dashboard I did on Tableau Public is all about comedic actors in serious roles. And so you see Robin Williams, Jim Carrey, but this is this data set that I just keep using over and over and over again. And instead of always going to like new data source, and this is an Excel, so go in Excel and then sorting through my my drives to find that file, we can make it really easily accessible just by right clicking on the data source and add to save data sources. I can save it here, my data sources, and then when I go to new data source, it just pops up in my saved data sources. Really, really easy, quick. You don't have to repeat all those unnecessary steps. This is a dashboard that I recently created. Actually got visited today, so that was pretty exciting. It was all about a game called Song Quiz on the Alexa, and I tracked everything that I did in this game. So that doesn't really matter. What I'm really talking about is the ability to zoom into a dashboard in Tableau Desktop. Unfortunately, you can't do that. What I'd really like to do is to like zoom into this area and get it pixel perfect, but there's no zoom capability. I mean, there are zoom capabilities in certain spots. I can go over to a sheet and look at this calculation, for example, and I can use the control key and my mouse wheel to zoom in to a calculation. That's great when doing presentations. But unfortunately, there's no way to do that in Tableau Desktop anywhere else. And when I say that, you know that there actually is. Tableau started to create these new menus. If you ever go to the dashboard actions menu, you'll see that this looks quite a bit different than it used to. This looks more like it is on the web. And guess what you can do in there? You can zoom in and you can zoom out. This is actually pretty nice because this is a little too zoomed in for me. I can zoom out and I can see all my dashboard actions. Or I can go to the view data window, and this is going to have very little data, and I can zoom in and out of that window. And something that drives me nuts in these objects, I have this scroll bar here. I know I think I can drag this up. Maybe I can't drag this up. What you can do is just zoom out, and then you can see everything. So you can actually zoom out and zoom out into this window. That's really nice. My hope, fingers crossed, is that Tableau starts to allow us to zoom into any part of the dashboard and allows us to kind of focus on those things that we want to get pixel perfect. I should note, if you ever use web edit and you're building dashboards or just editing them on the web, since it's in a web browser, you can do zoom there. So a really nice feature of web edit that you can actually zoom in to a dashboard. I mentioned stacked bar charts before. Stacked bar charts are not my favorite. And like I said, they do some things well. You can see the total. You can see chairs as the leading seller, followed by phones, followed by storage. If we click on the West region, we can make comparisons in the West region really easily. Again, we can see chairs, then phones, then tables. But what if we were trying to compare sales in the East region? Well, that's really, really difficult because they don't share this axis. They're not at the same starting point. So it's really hard for me to tell, is copiers a better seller or is binders, right? We can see that with a tooltip, but visually that's really hard to see. And that completely defeats the purpose of data visualization. But we know our stakeholders like stack bar charts. So many of them do. So what I try to do is improve this chart. And I should note, this is looking at sum of sales by subcategory, and then we've got it broken out by region. So what I always tell people, I'm just gonna hit the control key, we'll leave it on color, and I'm just gonna bring this region field up to our columns. Now we can see what I think is a vast improvement. We can now make all the comparisons within the central region, within the East region, within all the regions. But and we can tell, you know, in the central region, chairs is the highest selling, followed by phones, then binders. And we can see that in every different region. But you're probably looking at me going, well, we lost the total. We can't tell how in aggregate, in total, how these things are selling. So, okay, that's good. We can add totals and go to add row grand totals. And I hit the wrong one. Seems like I do that constantly. And now we've added a grand total. So now we can make the comparisons within each region still, and we can make the comparison at the grand total level. But again, I mentioned our stakeholders love these stacked bar charts. So in my opinion, if we have it broken out this way, why not give them the grand total as a stacked bar chart? So how would we do that? Because, you know, we've got region on columns up here, and we got region on color. And if I edit this color, it's just setting a grand total to be gray. It's not actually making the grand total a stacked bar chart. So yeah, maybe we could do it as a separate sheet. That's a possibility. Then we kind of run into what Ken just talked about. If we have lots of figures, then we have this problem with scrolling dashboards. So there's a little trick that you can do. I'm going to go to the region, just like I did with size before, where I duplicated that pill, or I duplicated that field. I've duplicated the region field, and then I'm going to replace this region on color with this region copy. When I do that, watch the stacked bar. I'm just going to drop it on there. Watch the stacked bar, or excuse me, the grand total turns into a stacked bar. So just by using a copy of the pill that you have on your view, you can trick Tableau into thinking that this should be a stacked bar chart. Now you have the nice breakout for you, and you have a stacked bar chart for your stakeholders. This is the last one I'm going to go over. This is looking, we talked about Tableau visionaries. This is looking at all the visionaries in history. There's been 114 total. There are currently 50 visionaries and 60 Hall of Famers. And I kind of just did this fun thing where I created this sort of baseball card thing. So there's Jenny Martin. She's a 1 year and a current visionary. Here's Ken, a Hall of Famer, and here's me, a current visionary with 4 years. And it kind of have this cool little baseball card look, but you can't really get any aggregate data that way. So what I did was just create for other people this table. So I just created this table, and you can kind of scroll through here. It's kind of like a timeline chart or Gantt chart, and you can see, hey, Ken Flerlage was a visionary 5 years, and then he went to the Hall of Fame. Kevin's been a visionary for 4 years. There's where Jenny Jenny Martin, her 1 year so far in 2023, right? So we have this for all 114 people, and it's just a chart, and then I put it into a collapsible container with this button, right? One of the kind of cool things you can do in Tableau, if you didn't know, is you can now copy and paste. So I can copy dashboard items. So I can hit copy here, or I can just hit Control C, and then I can paste it using Control V. And the weird thing about these collapsible container buttons is I can create 2 of them, and either of them will open and close that thing. So I can actually create a third one if I wanted. There's another one, and all of them will open and close the same dashboard item. I'm going to back that off. Just hitting Control Z real quick. And so I'm just got 2 of them here. But what this does allow me to do is create this really nice user interface. So as the standard, I've just got this button that says table. What I'm going to do is click that, and I'm going to edit this button. And when the item's shown, I don't want this close button. I'm going to get rid of it. And I'm going to make this a transparent shape, basically something you can't see. So now that button disappears. This one's still working. What I want now is, and I'll get to the end result here. I want to change this one when the item is hidden to be a transparent shape. Okay. And when the item's shown, I want it to be this X. Okay. So now you'll see what's happening when I click this. The button still works even though it's transparent. When I click this and open it, we've got this X. What I'm going to do is just tile this X inside of this collapsible container. I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to show you the end result. So what we end up with is this really incredible UI. We're all used to opening a window in Windows, and how you close it isn't usually how you open it. I open it here and then I close it. Excuse me, I close it with the X at the top right. So what I've done is build this UI, and I give this credit to Desiree. She blanking on the last name. I'm sorry, Desiree. But she built this and showed me like, hey, this is super cool use case. So we can click this, open it. Now we have this button to close it. So it's become this super user-friendly UI that we're all used to using. Click the button to open it, and then click the X to shut. And that's just using duplicated dashboard show hide buttons. Okay, that was a lot. Again, it was being recorded. You can catch this on Salesforce Plus, or you can go to that URL just to see all the different blog posts related to our content. I don't know if there's time, but we would be happy to take questions from the folks if there is.
Just no questions from Ramos. He's not allowed any more questions.
Yeah, he's a stinging Kansas City Chief lover.
Thank you so much, guys. That was amazing. Do any of you in the room have questions before we look at the chat? Yeah, go for it.
Thanks, guys, for the presentation. I appreciate the student here. So recently I did a project in Tableau with rat sightings in New York City. And when I was plotting them on the map, I couldn't find a way to do street view or neighborhood views. So I used Mapbox to do those stuff. So does Tableau allows itself to do street views, neighborhood views directly in itself, or we have to use some API from?
I apologize. I am having a hard time hearing, so I don't know if somebody could tell us what that question was.
The question was working on a rat sightings in New York project. They'd use Mapbox to bring in a sort of street view, and the question was whether you can do that natively in Tableau or you need to leverage Mapbox to do that.
A street view. So what do you mean specifically by street view? Just to be able to see the streets on the map, or do you want something more detailed?
Something sort of Google Maps, sort of that sort of. Because if I did a project for just plain white map, and it was highlighted like some heat map, but on adding street view, it became more detailed and more this.
The response was, if I don't know if you heard that.
Yeah,
No,
we could. Yeah.
Like a more Google Maps style view is what we're after. Yeah.
I mean, you.
Yeah, I hate to say that.
Okay,
Go ahead, Kev. No, you go ahead.
I mean, Tableau innate has some different background map styles. You know, it defaults to that sort of light, and one of the map styles is streets. So you can certainly get. I mean, I can share my screen really quickly, and I don't know that this is answering the question, but if you go up to map background layers, then you have this default light map, and you can actually set it to normal or dark or streets, right? So you can get this information. I'm just zooming into Cincinnati, and you can get all the layout of the streets. Now, when you talk about Google Maps, Google Maps has this ability to sort of do this street view thing where you can drop the little guy on there and see houses and things like that. That's not something you can do in Tableau. There are some tricks, and I believe Jeff Schaefer on Data Plus Science. DataPlusScience.com has have some tricks on how you can actually embed Google Maps in a web object in a Tableau dashboard. It can be tricky, and because they keep changing how it works. But in just Tableau, not using Mapbox or anything like that, you can just change to the streets background map. Hopefully that does kind of what you're looking for it to do.
Any other question? No. Are there any in the chat? I haven't opened the chat.
Laura, you're saying there's a map layer you can turn on. Was I showing the same thing as you, or did you have some other suggestion?
Yeah, you had streets selected. It's you had the Google Map style, and then one of the boxes that you have to tick right on showing layers is streets. And I don't think all of those are necessarily ticked off by default.
Gotcha. Okay, understood.
Cool. Well, if there's no other questions, Ken, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. I think everyone learned a lot there.
Awesome.
So yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Cool. So up next, we have the team from Wiiisdom, who are going to talk a little bit around data governance. If you want to jump. Yeah.
What player category is
That.
it? Okay.
The owl thing.
The owl thing.
Yeah, that tool.
Looks like an. Yeah. There you go. Good. So much sharing going on here. It's a little trippy. Cool. Oh yeah, success. Okay, well, cool. I took the Amtrak up earlier today, and I was sitting next to a cat. I'm pretty allergic to cats, and so I'm feeling like a little sneezy, a little, just altogether phlegmy. So forgive me if I hawk in the middle of this. But yeah, we're going to keep going with the TC Encore theme. My name is Jeremy Blaney, and I am the VP of Product Marketing at Wiiisdom. I'm joined today by Ace.
My name is Ace Jalali. I am a solution consultant with Wiiisdom. I come from 5 years with Tableau, so I'm pretty comfortable with that world. And now with Wiiisdom, I have a pretty similar role where I showcase the product and I help the customers integrate Wiiisdom within their world. So happy to be here and show you some of the cool stuff we've been up to at Wiiisdom.
Yeah, for sure. And just by way of introductions, I've been with the Wiiisdom team for about, I guess, 8 weeks now. I also joined from Tableau, did a lot of different things there over the year, but my farewell tour was leading Tableau Blueprint. And so as much as I love, building dashboards and learning about tips and tricks on how to build even more impactful and amazing dashboards, I also have a deep appreciation for all of the process stuff that you as analysts and you as data leaders need to bring into your organizations to be successful with analytics, to promote data literacy, to create a strong data culture, and all that kind of stuff. So without further ado, for the next, whoops, we're not going to kick that too many times, but we'll see. For the next 30 minutes or so, we're just going to discuss a series of problems that all of us have suffered with for far too long, right? We're going to talk about the problem of missed errors in Tableau dashboards, the problem of not having enough time to thoroughly test Tableau dashboards to catch errors before they become risks or costly mistakes for your organization. We're also going to discuss the problem of the Wild West, right? How do you know of all content that is out there on Tableau Server or Tableau Cloud, what data sources and what data dashboards are accurate, were recently updated, and as a result, reliable for decision-making? This isn't just going to be a commiseration session. I do think it's important to go through that for the healing process. We're also going to talk about solutions, right? Including how to automate Tableau testing and streamline your analytics governance workflow more broadly. The spoiler alert is that it has everything to do with this new and emerging concept called analytics ops, which is kind of like DevOps, data ops, but for the analytics experience. So without further ado, let's jump into it, beginning with a few thoughts on Tableau content validation. So testing stuff, it's a part of who we are, right? As children, we dipped our toes into the proverbial water to figure out, like, if it's hot, if it's cold, should I do this or should I not do it, right? We asked similar questions as adults, but we're not testing the water. Well, I guess we are, right? I was just in Orlando for the weekend, and my appetite for like swimming in cold water is not what it once was. But here we're tasting wine, right? We go to wineries, we taste wine, we test the wine to see if we like it. And if we do, then we end up buying a bottle or two or a case or whatever, right? This, should sort of frustrate everybody and make you think like, oh my gosh, here we are again. But as a people, testing was a big part of our lives for the past few years, right? Prior to going to conferences, coming into buildings, or doing anything like international travel, you were required to do the very uncomfortable Q-tip brain tickle thing. Nobody liked doing that. I don't know anybody that liked doing that. If you did, like, keep it to yourself. But we did it anyways. We did it anyways because we wanted to keep each other safe and slow the spread of COVID. Testing stuff is also a part of your professional life, right? As data and analytics professionals, we want to know with absolute certainty that our data sources and that our dashboards are 100% accurate and as a result, completely reliable for decision making. Our stakeholders, our business stakeholders, they expect nothing less because they are using this content or these assets to make decisions. They're using this stuff to take action. They are using this stuff to drive business value for their organizations, right? The stakes are really high. And so we hold ourselves and each other accountable, like as a community outside of work and as a community within our workplace for delivering perfection. But the problem is like perfection is really hard to achieve. You have to test a lot of stuff to be able to say a dashboard is 100% accurate and completely reliable.
That's right. And from an analyst point of view, I have firsthand experience with a lot of this because I've spent a lot of time on many of the things that we see here, right? So we test for accuracy. Is the data correct? And is it confirmed from the data sources standpoint, right? And sometimes you change the filters. Is the data still correct or not, right? So we have to test for those. Second, you have to run these tests as a user experience from point of view of an individual who's looking at this, playing around with the filters, the parameters. Is everything working the way that we wanted it to, right? So if you have experience in that world, you've probably done a lot of this manually. The QA process is very familiar to you. Security, obviously, is very important. We can dig very deep into it, but I think we're all very familiar why that's very important. Stress testing. Admins like this one a lot because they want to understand if their environments have enough juice to handle a certain amount of people, and as things progress, how is the environment handling that that situation, right? But obviously, we're not done yet because we also have regression testing. Because when you're promoting content from one environment to another, or something happens with your database, you want to know if your data or your visual is looking the same way it was supposed to, or if there are any inconsistencies. So it's really important to know what that dashboard looks like before and after an event.
So we skipped over performance. Your dashboard could be completely accurate. All the numbers could match like the source of truth within your data warehouse, right? Your viz could also be very functional. Filters, parameters, everything could work just completely perfect. But none of that matters if the dashboard takes 45 seconds to load or 15 minutes to load. People are never going to hit the dashboard, right? And so you need to test for performance as well.
That's right. And I'm guilty of that too, because again, I've worked hands-on with a lot of this. So I have first-hand experience with a lot of this. But to say that these tests need to run all day, every day, it's not hyperbolic because the production cadence kind of needs to follow this, right? We're spending the day and every day working on creating the analytics and reports for the stakeholders, testing for accuracy, for user experience, for security, performance, stress tests, regression. So this is really part of the job. It always needs to happen, right? So we also need to run these tests in the context of strategic IT initiatives like database migration, environment updates, cloud migrations, Tableau upgrades, there's maintenance that happens. So to look at all of this in a holistic way, it makes sense that this has to happen at all times. And you're not supposed to lose the access to that dashboard, right? But you did. So why is that happening? And the testing really helps with looking at all of that in a holistic way.
Yeah, how many people have been there, right? Tableau upgrade was accomplished over the weekend, or maybe like your organization is in the middle of a database migration and everything was supposed to go fine over the weekend. And then from Monday, people log into Tableau server, Tableau cloud, and maybe like some stuff works, but the stuff that your stakeholders like really need, it doesn't work. And they don't, go asking the central IT team that was ultimately responsible for that, why it's not working. They're looking at you like you are the throat to choke and choke you get, right? Like we've all been there. We've all been there. Just talking about some of the other risks of not running tests for the various scenarios that Ace was talking about. Operationally, like I said, all of us have been in that situation where an upgrade or database migration took place. Suddenly, nobody could access their content. Financial and compliance risks. All you need to do is Google calculation errors, and not as it relates to Tableau specifically, but as it relates to like Excel, and you will find countless stories about organizations that have had like even the smallest error cause really big losses for their organization, whether that was a result of a decision being made, or maybe as a result of like investor lost confidence because a decision was made that led to significant losses for that organization. Reputational. I mean, just by a show of hands, like how many people, maybe not, like it's always embarrassing. Like if people don't raise their hands, then I'm like, well, I guess I'm the only, person that does this here, right? It'll be the two of us. Raise your hand. Yeah. But no, like how many times have you, or who has been in a situation where you have pushed a dashboard to a stakeholder that mistakenly contained an error or two, but you didn't know it, they found it, right? Has everybody been in that situation? Does anybody have a story you want to share
Safe
about
space
that?
here.
It is safe space. It's being recorded, so. It's not. But does anybody have a story that they want to share? It's important for the healing process.
Doesn't want to.
You don't want to share?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, we'll move on, just in case we get kicked out at 8:45 or whatever it is. And then let's talk just about like opportunity costs and trust. And 2021, Gartner reported that on average, data and analytics leaders were investing about 10% of their organization's revenue on data and analytics initiatives, which is a lot, right? We're talking about millions, billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, like in aggregate. When people are repeatedly exposed to and burned by these different risks, they adopt old behaviors, right? They reestablish data silos, they rely on data downloads for reporting, and this obviously creates sort of like this awful virtual cycle, which increases the risk exposure for the organization across all of these different categories. Validation, so I think we've established this by now. Validation is important, but it's insufficient in and of itself. Tableau Blueprint, as I said, I love Tableau Blueprint. I think it is really just an amazing body of work. I believe some have referred to it as poetic, at least one person. I think that one person was my mother, but never mind, moving on. Tableau Blueprint is right. It provides this roadmap for organizations to really just expand and optimize their use of data. It's filled to the brim with processes and best practices related to strategy work, related to data literacy, governance, which we're obviously super keen on, and a whole lot more. There's a section on content governance in particular, and it addresses a lot of the problems that we're talking about here. Blueprint states that validation is super important, but it must be followed by promotion as well as certification. So promotion refers to the task that you take to move that fully validated content to another location. Now it could be a production project if you're on a Tableau cloud site, or it could be a production site if you're on Tableau server, right? You do this because you want to keep that in progress stuff, like that in development stuff, and the fully validated, like ready to go stuff separate from each other, right? You don't want your stakeholders to use that half-baked analysis or that in progress work for decision. That would be, bad, and obviously it sort of leads to all of those other risks that we talked about previously being incurred. Certification, this refers to the boxes that you check so your stakeholders know of all of that content that lives in that production project or production site, which is not only accurate, but is also recent and therefore reliable for decision making, right? BI content, like bread, it can go stale. Circumstances change, questions change, and requirements change. And without certification, either at the data source or that dashboard level, it's very difficult to know of all of that production content, what content is still good to go, right?
To sum up what Jeremy was mentioning, so here's what happens. Before you develop a dashboard, there's a set of requirements that you're looking at, and you go grab them and you come develop your dashboard. Then during the validation process, you're looking at all those requirements and making sure they're met. So if they are met, then that content is promoted and ultimately it gets certified, right? Pretty simple.
People follow this process, right?
Pretty
Like,
simple,
we're
straightforward.
simple,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Well, yes, but unfortunately, time is precious, especially when you're an analyst who's completely swamped with requests for help. And there aren't enough hours in the day to keep up with the backlog of analytics and reports that need to be ensured that content is also validated and governed. So people skip steps. And again, I'm guilty of this. I know this is a safe space, so yeah, I've done this before myself. I know there are moments where you're just swamped with so much work, so they don't have the time to complete all the validation process. They don't have the time to test for all the reports and accuracy and performance. So they need to get the content in the hands of the stakeholders as soon as possible. And these steps are skipped in that process. Certification is also skipped. Now stakeholders don't have any real idea of how to look at this from an accurate standpoint, and if it's recent or if it's reliable, so you're not really sure exactly if that content is in the process that should have gone through. What happens when we skip all these steps? Well, we covered this already. We're exposing ourselves to risk, and the organization categorically is looking at financial, reputational risks, and so on.
So what are we to do? Are we to just accept that risk is this, unavoidable thing? No. At Wiiisdom, what we do is we have seen countless organizations really eliminate their risk exposure by testing, promoting, and certifying at scale. And that at scale piece is really the most critical part. So let's take a look at the data value. So to produce business value, data needs to move from collection to action, passing through stuff like storage and processing and so on and so forth, right? On paper, this looks like you need to move your data from A to B to C, and bing, bang, boom, it's all done. Each step in this process is obviously an aggregate of many, many little steps. And without governance, these many little steps can turn into really big problems for your organization. And this is why stuff like data ops exists, right? Data ops aims to improve data reliability, integrity, really by orchestrating and automating data integration and processing pipelines, right? Data engineers, they love data ops because it adds like a little bit of governance and rigor to an otherwise very chaotic process. But do you ever notice that when people talk about data ops, they kind of refer to it as a practice that ends before anything, analytics begins, right? In other words, data ops doesn't extend to the world of Tableau. It ends with Snowflake, Databricks, et cetera. That, feels really insufficient to me, especially when you consider there's a whole series of things that happen after that point, right? Data undergoes a bit more transformation, as we're going to see in a little bit, through stuff like Alteryx and Tableau Prep to meet the needs of the business. People create calculations in Tableau. The list sort of goes on and on. This is where analytics ops fits. Analytics ops is this emerging methodology that is really just applying principles from data ops, ML ops, dev ops, really just like all the ops to the cycle of analysis with a focus on automation. So analytics ops really just aims to build trust in data and analytics and increase confidence in data-driven decision-making broadly by streamlining all of those things that we were just talking about, right? The development, the testing, the deployment, and the monitoring processes for analytics and dashboards and reports. And the monitoring processes is really important. You don't just want to do this as a part of the development cycle. You obviously we all know that there are things that go bump once a dashboard hits production, a column name changes, a data type change is, and you don't have time every single day to go out there and like spot check stuff and say like, yep, it's all good to go. More often than not, it's your business stakeholder who discovers the issue. They come to you and, again, like you're the throat to choke. So, in some analytics ops is best thought of as the final mile of data ops. It takes all of that CI/CD, goodness, just a little bit better for the benefit of all the things that are happening within that analytics layer. So I could go on about this for hours and hours, but obviously we don't have that kind of time. So what we're going to do is we're going to just show you what in practice with a little bit of a demo, but also with a little bit of, well, I don't think we're going to do the skit. The skit was so good at TC, but we've got sort of like a different crew here and it just doesn't feel right to do. So anyways, let's do skit like. So meet Ace. Ace is he's like us, right? He's a Tableau content creator. He's loved by everybody in the organization because he's known for producing analytics, for building, reports and dashboards that are just very beautiful, to the tune of what we saw just a little bit ago, but also very reliable. Ace's validation workflow, it looked similar to our own, right? You build stuff, he passes it along to a peer, spot checks for errors. From there, he might, pass it off to a data steward or somebody who's going to publish that dashboard to a production project or a production site. One day, Ace gets a note from his boss. The organization is doing some quote unquote restructuring. And so from now on, Ace is on his own. He needs to manage that entire workflow by himself. There's no more buddy checks. There's no more third party to promote his stuff. Like it's on him to manage this stuff from start to end. Ace is obviously pretty frustrated by this change. More work is never a good thing. He starts to write a response back to his boss that's filled with a bunch of expletives. He's like, oh my gosh. But then he thinks better of it because he doesn't want to get fired. So he's like backspace, impressively backspaces, and then he just like throws a thumbs up emoji, which is sort of the passive aggressive way of saying like, okay, whatever, whatever. I do what you want me to do because you're not. What's done is done. Like thumbs up emoji, time to move on. This goes fine for a little while. Right. But eventually, though, the workload just becomes too much. Ace does exactly what I said previously, right? He starts to skip steps because he's got a lot to deliver, and there just aren't enough hours in the day to thoroughly test everything during development or to keep an eye on all of that, content, like I said previously, once it's up in production. So as you can imagine, things start to go wrong. Ace's stakeholders start to message him. And I'm sure like we've all seen this firsthand about broken data sources and mismatched numbers. Why does this look like this in Salesforce, but it looks like this in my Tableau dashboard, right? And this doesn't just happen once, it happens again and again and again, ultimately creating those trust issues like I was talking about previously. Ace notices that adoption of his dashboards begin to fall, and people are, as a result of it, like actively turning away from his BI content. And that's like a knife in your heart, right? You just spent all this time creating this stuff. It's like beautiful and amazing, but the numbers are wrong. And so people aren't using it. It just sucks, right? It just sucks. So one day, Ace's boss asks him to come by the office, and he's like, hey, Ace, I really appreciate how quickly you turned around that sales dashboard last week. Really needed it, had board level visibility. But there's just one small issue. When I was showing it to my boss is like, yeah, this is cool, but this numbers are wrong. And that made, my boss just embarrassed. Like nobody likes to look foolish in front of your boss's boss. This is what has happened here. And then he goes on to say, like, listen, we've worked so hard to build this place into a data-driven organization, but mistakes like this to reinsert the knife into the heart destroy trust. So Ace is fed up. He needs to find a better way forward, and so he turns to his own good friend Google, and he just starts searching a bunch of things, right? A string of words that have something to do with this problem. Words like Tableau, testing, analytics, governance, operations, blah 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 blah, and then he lands on the Wiiisdom page, right? Quickly learns that Wiiisdom has been around for about 10 years, helping customers build trust in analytics and increase confidence in data-driven decision-making by streamlining all that stuff that is in previous development, the testing, the monitoring processes for analytics. and dashboards and reports, not just for Tableau, but for, some other applications as well, like SAP Business Objects and Power BI, right? Digs a little deeper, loves what he's seeing, Wisdom Ops for Tableau, can automate BI testing, super cool, and streamline the workflow, minimizing risk exposure, building trust in analytics, learns it's no-code solution, anybody can build tests, that sounds super cool. Don't have time to get spun up on another language, right? Can also accelerate regression testing for database migrations and a whole bunch of other stuff. So like I could get the bullet points, like walk you through all this, but let's show people what this looks like.
I want to just take everyone through a brief demo of what the environment looks like now, because we went through everything that we can do, but let's see visually what that actually looks like, the world of Wiiisdom Ops here. So as I'm going through this demo, I just want you to take a look at this from a point of view of yourself and your life cycle right now and your work and how this may fit in, right? So what I'm going to show you immediately is just when we're recreating that user experience and end-to-end user experience, what I'm trying to do is I open up a visual, I set a number of filters to certain values. Maybe I check for the validation of those numbers. If my metrics are within a certain range, if my dimensions are the values that are supposed to be there. If yes, great. If not, what's missing? So what I've built here in front of you is exactly that, those tasks, right? I'm opening up this visualization. I'm navigating to that specific area in my Tableau online or server environment. I'm setting a number of filters to different values. In this case, I'm setting my segment filter to just those two values. And if you're familiar with the Superstore data, this will make more sense to you. And it's pretty much all the same types of things that I do, right? I go and select marks, make sure things are going. I'll just go ahead and run this test so we can see what happens really physically within this world. So at this stage, when I've set all those parameters and everything is ready for me, all I really do is sit back and let Wiiisdom do its thing, right? I'm hands off. This window pops open, that visual comes up, those values are now selected or deselected. It's really going through all the experience that I was going through one by one, maybe on a cadence that made sense, right? So great, it looks like my test ran successfully, right? So all those steps have been met. And now I can actually take a look at the report of it, and I can look at the archive of all the reports that I've had. And this is great for me because it's shown me all the statuses for every individual task that I had. Also, immediately gives me a little bit about performance too. So if there are outliers, I can really specifically navigate to exactly which filter may have caused that issue. So I can dig deeper really quickly, right? So for each task, it also gives me some notes about what happened here, a screenshot of the state of the dashboard at that point of the task that I ran. And essentially, again, that user experience that I had from a QA standpoint, going through all those filters, all those validations, all the parameters, everything just did it for me in an automated fashion. And I can schedule this so it runs before my business users are in. If there are issues, I can integrate it within with my email or Slack or webhooks to be notified immediately when I get in. I know something is wrong, or if it's good, I know. I also want to show you really quickly a little bit about the regression tests and what that looks like. So we have various forms of regression tests. There's two specific ones. It's always looking at the state of your dashboard within a certain time frame, right? What it looks like currently as opposed to a point in time. In this example, I want to show you a cross-environmental test, right? So when you are doing those migrations or promoting your content from an environment to another environment, so going from UAT to prod, and really want to see if that dashboard is looking exactly the way it was supposed to, right? So I have my source and my target. So I set up my source dashboard, again, looking at the browse item here. I set up my target item also. But then here I have a set of parameters that I can check for. So I want to make sure the image search is looking exactly the same. So that's the highest level of testing. And then I want to look at the summary data, make sure the underlying data is coming back. Some of the metadata, the worksheets are there, the filters are there, the filter values are all there. I won't run this right now for the sake of time, but I will show you the report because that's actually my favorite part too. So with this report, I can see that there's been some failures, right? I can see immediately from a visual standpoint, from image to image, what is happening. It's giving me these red marks. So my source is looking like this. But my target, there's quite a number of different issues here.
Yeah, there's a few issues.
Yeah,
Few issues. Canceled
definitely.
dinner plans.
The night we're busy. Yeah, that's right. We have to figure this one out. But instead of me really trying to understand exactly all the points by visually looking at it, Wiiisdom is telling me what areas to focus on, right? So my parameters are looking good. All right, no worries about that. But obviously there are some issues with my summary data, and I can dig deeper into each of those areas and see what that looks like. And maybe just visually looking at this number might help me if I'm a data steward who's familiar with this data. I can look and see that the filters exist, okay? But the filter values that I have selected, they're inconsistent. So it's telling me immediately that some of those filters on one dashboard, and I can see that here too, because for my source side, I have all the filters selected, whereas in my target category is off. And if you come from the analytics world and you've done some QA, my favorite way of checking was making sure, first of all, if all the filter values are selected in the right way, right? So immediately I'll go check that, fix it, come back to another test. If that's good, I think one check to go off from. So this is a very quick look at the power of regression just by the number of parameters that we can look at and the values that are here that we can have the flexibility. Even, you can limit to just a number of different ideas here. So if you have more focused regression tests, you can specify in that case too. Lastly, I want to show you an example of a scenario where you want to look at your visualization. You're looking at the numbers of this metric, but you want to confirm this metric, these numbers are matching to the numbers that are coming directly from your data source and database, right? So in this example, I'm opening up a visualization. Then I am setting a filter value. So I'm setting my year value to 2019. And I want to, at that point, go ahead and test my PostgreSQL and check if this SQL matches the values that are coming from my visualization at that state of the visual, right? So I've written the query for it. I am specifying the year and everything, so it matches one-to-one with that end. Now, the more important piece here is if this runs successfully, I want my data source to be certified, right? So on Tableau, my users already know that this has ran through perfectly. But if it ran with a failure, I want it to be decertified. So that level of communication happens automatically. And if there are issues, my users aren't necessarily surprised per se. They kind of understand that this is happening. So that level of communication has already been established. And now we can really dig into understanding what happened there, right? As opposed to now my users come in and tell me these numbers are wrong. They kind of know something is up already. In this case, I want to show you the results of it as well. So everything ran successfully. Everything is great. I can see my visual was open and this is what it looked like. I can see my filter value was selected and this is what the view looked like at that stage. And then ultimately my SQL was checked and looks like that one ran successfully also. So I went through quite a number of different things, but again, I just want to bring attention to what the power here is in terms of creating that user experience, setting those values for every kind of task that you had in your environments. And just want to take a pause and open it up to you. Are there any questions or comments? Is there? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I have a question. Just
Sure.
to clarify, is this tool just evaluating performance and whether or not the dashboard is running correctly
Mhm.
and the experience of that dashboard when an end user uses it, it's up to par, it's expected? Or does the tool also have functionality to help companies or teams deal with and design a data lineage documentation scheme to really understand how data is moving from point A to point B? What are all the steps that go in that process? And what are some of the implications if steps are skipped, if they're not consistently followed, that kind of thing? Like really, if you could clarify again, what is really the scope of this tool?
Option A,
Mhm.
option A, or number one, whatever was the first thing that you said. Too late, no, you just didn't cancel me. No, it's, yeah, it's the first,
Yeah.
right? A lot of content on Tableau Cloud, Tableau server, on a piece of content by piece of content basis. Is it accurate? Is it performant? Is it, is it functioning as expected, and not just on a piece by piece basis, but in aggregate, looking across all of your content or, Tableau Cloud, which are out of performance, which you need to then, create like a short list of, data stewards or whatever to go yell at, hey, not doing things the way that you should.
Yeah, quick question.
It seems like creating good tests is essential to getting useful.
Yeah,
Also,
100%, right.
So to what extent is it always kind of a manually created set of things like, well, this is a good filter value and to test in general?
Mhm.
Or do you do any sort of approach where you can do a multivariate sort of testing that's involves not just human creation of the test?
Yeah, good thoughts. So today, what I've been here for, like I said, 8 weeks, you've been here for like 6 weeks or so. I think one of the first things we realized is that, it's not impossible, like sit there and like build out tests, but it's like, it's right. Like, it's like anything. The first time you build stuff, you just need doing. We would like to, create more, what I would call like test templates and test like packages that could just almost like accelerators in Tableau that could be like an 80% finished solution. So you just like do the final 20% and then have it like ready.
Yeah,
Is that where the question was?
Yeah,
going, or kind of?
In fact, reason
Yeah.
one more question is this on top of desktop or server/cloud?
great question. So we established a connection to Tableau Online or Tableau Server with the context. So we're always hitting that environment to look at the content. You can import Tableau workbooks into here. So we have Tableau files that you can kind of take a look at things. But the goal is to kind of really look at your environment, right? And see what that looks like. And kind of to expand on that first question. So I would say, which one takes more time? Doing the same test every day or at a specific cadence, or building it once and having it scheduled so it runs all the
I
time?
guess what I was getting at is just, there's so many different things one
Yeah,
could test.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, but at least in this current version, you manually create the permutations for it to test.
Definitely. And my experience has always been there are specific things that we're testing, right? One of the biggest requests that we're getting right now is that they just want to make sure the workbook's open every morning. They're facing issues that maybe there's performance issues or there's database issues, some inconsistency in their world where they're being notified from their business side that this is not happening. With automated opening viz, you can open up every individual visualization on your environment. There's no real limit to it. You can open at project level and have it run. So there's a lot of, just time saving approaches to that too. But yes, back to kind of Jeremy's point too, the template world would be a nice way to approach too.
We'll go over here. We'll go over here and then we'll come back.
We're making it. Hi.
Fail, the costs that come out of it, does it go to everyone? Is it tiered, like?
Yeah.
It's like a tier 1, it goes to like only the developer, like you can go through the process.
Sure, I can go through a couple of different things. So with the integration process, you can establish webhooks that notifies only certain people, or same thing with emails or Slack, right? So you identify the set of users that you really want to notify. So it's very similar to how kind of that world looks like, right? But we also have a Postgres database integration where you can collect the metadata of these tests that are being ran. You can really look at this dashboard that's really beautifully designed in terms of showing how many functional tests have ran, how many of them failed, and specifically which part of these tests are failing. But yeah, going back to your immediate question, you can designate exactly which group needs to stay. Yeah. Mhm.
I was thinking, is that a separate integration for the one that you use today? Like if you're trying to get like demonstration, see like people's behaviors on Tableau server, is it a separate one or is it the
It's a separate one. Yeah.
same to each other or not?
We're actually working on something like
Yeah.
that, yeah, to kind of create that analysis between both sides so we can really see which actions are causing the performance issues too. So yeah, that's something that's coming up as well.
I refer to this as like dumb intelligent testing, right? Like in a perfect world, you're able to see the most popular content types and the fact that none of those content types or dashboards or whatever are being tested. Conversely, you want to see the opposite, like we're, testing the stuff very thoroughly, very aggressively, and like no. So yeah.
Awesome questions. Great. Yeah.
So besides using this tool as a way to identify problem areas
Mhm.
for your environment and different workflows and things of that sort,
Mhm.
can it also recommend enhancements? So for instance, let's say your product uses a SQL query. Can it recommend optimized, faster SQL queries that you can run? Or can it recommend that, you need to remove LODs and things of that sort? Like, what's sort of the scope of that?
No, not today.
No.
Like that sort of gets back to the dumb and intelligent testing today. Like I would love to not just say like, hey, we found an issue, but like here's an example of
Yeah.
like how you might correct that particular issue. I think exactly. I think that's where like you add like I hate to say it, but like another step to your workflow, right? You look at performance recorder, you look at this,
Exactly.
you look at that. You know, so, yeah.
There was like a new feature,
Mhm. Yep.
see, like, reduction in yellow or something.
Exactly, and maybe at some point, it's just spitballing, there is no forward-looking slide here, do we integrate with that, so that way we just now people do that directly, hey, there's a problem area, over here, click here, and it takes you and it leverages like Tableau native functionality, like that would be. I think that's the fun part of it, like Wiiisdom's small, we're like 85, 90 people strong, and to have like a then like we'll be all which I think we all sort of aggressively, have opinions about, like, is kind of, anyways, go ahead, sorry, there was another question.
Yeah, quick question about the technologies that are useful for a new data analyst who might be really interested in supporting other data analysts and analyst ops. I see there's PostgreSQL, there's Power BI, there's Tableau. Are there any other technologies or directions for learning you might want to recommend to somebody who's doing something like this?
That's such a deep question. I mean, that's a deep question. I mean, I think like at the end of the day, we all work for very different types of organizations, right? All of our organizations have employed like a different analytics option. Some are highly centralized, some are highly decentralized. Even within decentralized, there might be one person who's the data steward who sort of does stuff on behalf of a team of 10. I mean, there's a lot of different. I mean, there's just a lot of different ways in which like analytics is done in organizations. And it's hard to like answer that question until like you appreciate it's sort of the nuance, right? If you're a new, analyst, a new business analyst in a highly decentralized organization, maybe you're never going to touch Wiiisdom because it is a team of 5 or 10 in the back rooms, right? If you're in a semi-decentralized organization, like a federated organization where there's one data steward supporting 10, like maybe still you'll never touch Wiiisdom because like there's one person who's going to do it on your behalf. But if you're a part of like a commercial or a medium business organization where you do everything sort of like as Ace did in this scenario, then maybe you would, right? Probably wouldn't be the first thing to do. Like you got to know how to use Tableau before you learn how to use Wiiisdom. But it's a hard question just because there's so many. And they all have their pros. Deviate too much. Yeah.
One more question.
Yeah.
Okay, this tool, is there performance difference or capabilities differences if you're on cloud versus if you're on server?
In terms of like connecting to those environments, no, but with version 2022.2 moving up, we have connected apps using Tableau, which helps a lot with the testing because prior to that, that feature wasn't available. So you always have to add a new step here for logging into Tableau. So that's the only difference that I see, but everything in terms of performance becomes kind of on the development design of your workbooks, right? So that's what you're going to be looking at. But no, on-prem or cloud, they're going to be on the same thing. Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome.
Should we pass it back to Jack? Jack is out. He's done.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
If you take anything from this presentation, it's to do this, like even if manual, like do this, because ultimately, it is the stuff that creates trust in analytics. And then when you start to feel like burdened by the manual work, give us a call, and we're happy to like talk to
Yeah.
you about how we can automate.
If there are more
right?
questions, definitely happy to answer and elaborate more. So please reach out to us. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Echo what they've just said, 100% reach out to them. Product's really great. I've seen it in action before tonight. The amount of times that I've been consulting and really could have used that. So get connected. We actually only had the space until 8:30 and it's now, I don't know, like 8:50 maybe. We had a great session with Flerlages and also Wiiisdom, so we're not actually going to have time for Tableau prep. It's not really a crossover user group, but you know, this is the Tableau prep user group for June. What we will have in August though is, so Libby Nell, who is part of the product team at Tableau, she was presenting on Devs on Stage at Tableau conference. She was meant to be doing a presentation tonight, but due to some family situation, she's actually not going to be around for a little while, but we will have her at our next session in August. She'll be way better than me if she can show the stuff that's coming in the future and not just the stuff that's like imminently being released. So we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you all for coming. If this was your first session, please bring a friend to the next one. It will be in August, August something, like middle of August sometime. Hopefully at Curious, but TBD, to see from these two. But yeah, thanks for coming. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we will see you soon.
Sorry, I didn't get to introduce myself.